Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to If Deku Was a Demigod Part 2. Last time on the What If, Izuku met Zeus, unlocking his full potential. Then he was given a piece of paper that guided him to Chiron, who trained him until he got to the entrance exams. And during the entrance exams, Izuku used his powers to overload robots, and he also saved a girl from the zero pointer, giving him a total of 77 points. Then afterward, Izuku participated in the quirk apprehension test, with it ending with Mineta getting last place. Then a day after he got dragged away, All Might led the hero training lesson, with him making the class do a heroes versus villains exercise, with it being Ochako and Izuku against Bakugo and Ida, with it ending with the hero team winning, so Izuku and Ochako. But it ended with Izuku being knocked out because he used all of his energy to fight Bakugo, and Bakugo following him to the nurse's office because he had to get healed from all the damage that Izuku's electricity did to him. Okay, so now that's out of the way, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we begin this what if hours after the last part ended, and Izuku just woke up. And when Izuku woke up, he found himself somewhat scratched up, but all the burns that were on his body from the training are gone, and he feels really exhausted. But before Izuku could figure out what to do next, Recovery Girl walked into the room. And seeing that he was awake, she told him that because he used a lot of his energy during the training, she was only able to use enough of his energy to heal all the serious damage rather than all of it. Then she told Izuku that it is good for him to go all out in training, but he shouldn't go so far that he passes out. Then she told Izuku that his classmate Bakugo also left a couple hours ago, and that he should hurry back to class because he's already missed a lot of the day. And hearing this, Izuku ran to class 1A, and when he got to the classroom, everyone was getting ready to go home. And when he got into the room, people from his class began to walk up to him, and they congratulated him for doing so good on the exercise. And they also gave him their names. But while people were giving introductions, Izuku knows that Bakugo was in the room. And seeing this, he asked Ochako, who just walked into the room, where did Bakugo go? And hearing this, she told him that Bakugo left right after the bell rang in a hurry, and that he has been acting quiet ever since he got back from the nurse's office. And hearing this, Izuku quickly ran out of the room and he began to look for Bakugo, which eventually led him to the front gates of UA. And when Izuku saw Bakugo, he asked him where was he going, and why was he in such a worse mood than normal. And Bakugo in response told him to shut up, and he asked why did he not tell him, and why has he been holding back on him for so long. And hearing this, it was obvious to Izuku that Bakugo's pride has been damaged. So he told Bakugo that he hasn't been holding back on him, and that just recently he's been actually training, and actually honing in on his talents and abilities. And hearing this, Bakugo tells him that he's lying, and that training couldn't possibly have increased his quirk by tenfold, because again, Bakugo only remembers when Izuku was only making static shocks, so him being able to do what he did seems way too strong for him. And hearing this, Izuku decided to tell him the truth, so he told him that he was finally able to meet someone that has been gone for a while, which helped him, and that his power isn't truly his own, but he's working on making it his own every single day. And hearing this, Bakugo wanted to shout at Izuku, telling him that he's saying even more lies. But because he doesn't want to continue on with the conversation, Bakugo just scoffs, and he tells Izuku that today will be the last time that he will lose to him, and that today has taught him he has so much more to learn, and that he needs to get stronger. Then right after Bakugo said that, he turned and he began to walk away. Okay, so now we skip to the next day. When the school day began, Aizawa announced that they will have to decide who the two class reps will be. And when he announced this, just about everyone in the class began to shout, saying that they should be chosen while raising their hands. And after a couple of seconds, Ida shot out of his seat, and he suggested that they should do a vote in order to decide who should be chosen, which everyone agreed to. And after a couple minutes, the voting was done, and Izuku and Momo were standing at the front of the classroom, with Izuku getting the role of class rep, and Momo getting the role as vice rep. And shortly after that was decided, it was time for lunch, with Ida, Izuku, and Ochako eating together. And while they were eating, Ochako asked Ida about his family, and it's with that the two learned that Ida comes from a family of heroes, with his older brother being the pro hero Ingenium. But before they could go more into depth about Ida's family, alarms throughout the entire school began to go off. And hearing this, the upperclassmen in the cafeteria immediately got out of their seats and they began to run towards the exit. And seeing this, Ida, Ochako, and Izuku got out of their seats as well, and they began to try to get the upperclassmen's attention to try to figure out what was going on. And after a couple of attempts, they were finally able to get the attention of a junior, who tells them that the security alarms have gone off, and that they should hurry to the panic rooms, because it means that at least someone has broken onto the campus grounds, and that could be very bad because it could be a dangerous villain. Then right after the junior said that, he ran off to try to escape. And seeing this, the three followed after the junior, but only after were they able to notice that the hallway was completely full of people who were pushing and shoving in order to get out. So they got shoved right into the crowd of people, but in the process they got split off from each other. And after around a minute, Ida got pushed against a glass wall that was facing towards the front of the school. And when Ida looked outside, he saw that there was a group of reporters at the front of the school, harassing President Mike and Eraserhead. And seeing this, Ida was able to piece together that there weren't any villains here, and that it was just a false alarm. So Ida began to look around for Izuku, which he was able to see, but no matter how much Ida tried to yell, his voice would get covered and muffled out by the huge wall of people in between the two of them. So Ida decided to take matters into his own hands. So he told Ochako, who was right next to him, to make him float. boat. And when she did, Ida used his engines to make him fly to an exit sign that is standing over the exit door. And when he landed, Ida shouted for everyone's attention. And seeing Ida, most of the people quieted down, at least a little. And when he was ready, Ida shouted that there weren't any villains attacking, and instead there was just a group of reporters outside. And hearing this, people began to look outside. And when they did, everyone began to calm down. And with that, the group of students were able to make it back to their classrooms without any difficulties. And when everyone in class one day made it back, Izuku had an announcement to make. So he went to the front of the class and he announced that he was giving his role as class rep to Ida, because he showed just a couple minutes ago that he has the traits to be the class president. And when Izuku was done talking, Izuku asked if Ida would accept. And after a couple seconds, Ida nodded his head in agreement. So now we skip a couple days. And when class began, Aizawa announced that they will be going on a field trip. So he tells the class to get dressed in their hero outfits, and that when they were dressed, get onto the bus that is waiting for them outside. And because Izuku's costume got destroyed during the Heroes vs Villains exercise, he was forced to wear his PE clothes. But of course, instead of the old PE gloves, it's the gloves that Zeus gave him. And after a couple minutes, the bus stops. And when class they got off the bus, they found themselves at the USJ. And waiting for them was the pro hero 13, who welcomed them to the USJ. And she began to give them a speech while walking them into the building, about how they are skilled and have powerful quirks that can be used to save many people's lives. But then she tells them that the opposite is also true, and that if they are not careful, many people can die. Then when 13 was done with the speech, she closed the doors of the USJ. But the second the doors closed, the lights in the USJ began to flicker on and off. And after around a minute of this, a giant portal opened up at the plaza of the USJ. And after a couple seconds, a guy with a hand mask, a giant bird monster, and a guy covered by the same energy that made the portal came walking out. Then when the three were a couple feet away from the portal, villain after villain began to appear out of the portal, making it so the plaza was getting completely filled with different villains. And once the last villain walked out of the portal got closed behind them. And seeing that the portal was closed, Aizawa told 13 to get the students and get out of the USJ. Then the second 13 nodded, Aizawa put on his goggles and he jumped down a flight of stairs towards the villains, and he began to fight the group. And seeing this, 13 shouted for everyone to run towards the exit. And seeing this, everyone began to run. But the second 13 shouted, the portal villain saw the class, so he began to fly towards the class. And before the students were able to get to the door, the portal villain blocked the door, and he extended his body mass, making it so he was surrounding the class completely. Then once the portal villain was sure that the class couldn't leave, he began to actually look around at the class, and he blurted out that the target wasn't there. Then he told the class that he is a member of the League of Villains, and that they were originally coming to kill the symbol of peace. But since he's not there, they are going to send a message to All Might. But before he could say anything else, Kirishima, Bakugo, and Izuku ran and jumped at the portal villain, and they tried to hit his body with their quirks. But wherever they hit their attack, they just seemed to go through him, and they didn't seem to have any effect. And seeing that they'll have a problem if left all together, Kurogiri began to cover the class with his energy, and he began to teleport the class. And after a couple seconds, Izuku felt completely wet. And when Izuku was finally able to open his eyes, he found himself around 30 feet below the surface of a giant body of water. And seeing this, Izuku began to swim up the best he could. But when there was about 10 feet left, something began to swim around Izuku, which made him stop. And when Izuku was able to focus on what it was, Izuku saw that it was a villain with a shark-like quirk. And after a couple more laps, the shark villain then rushed at Izuku to try to bite him. But before he was able to get to Izuku, Sue appeared and she jumped on the villain's head, making them get flung a couple of feet down. Then she shot her tongue at Izuku, which wrapped around him. Then she dragged Izuku onto a nearby ship. Then once Izuku was secured, Sue jumped back into the water to see if there was any more of their classmates in the water. But after a couple minutes of searching, she found nothing. So this time, when she got into the boat, she was followed by a group of villains. So when she climbed up the boat became completely surrounded. And seeing this, the two began to tell each other their quirks, and they began to think of a way to get away from the group of villains. But while they were coming up with a plan, they realized that the villains must not know what their quirks were, because if they did know, they wouldn't send someone with a frog and electric quirk to a place filled with water. And seeing this, they were able to come up with a plan which involved the both of them. But right after they were able to come up with a plan, a villain with a water manipulation quirk began to create a giant hand made out of water, and he was about to smash the boat with it. And seeing this, Izuku told Sue to dive as fast as she could, so she nodded, while Izuku jumped straight off the boat, where the villain with the water manipulation quirk was floating. And when the villain saw Izuku, he aimed the hand differently, so right before the hand hit the water, he had a few seconds to move the hand closer to Izuku, so it was aimed somewhere between Izuku and the boat, making the hand hit a part of the ship and some of Izuku, making him take some damage, but he was mostly fine. And when the hand hit the water, it created a giant splash, making it seem like an explosion has gone off. So water flew into the air, and during the commotion, Sue was able to swim into the depths of the water, with her being able to get to the very bottom of the body of water. So when the water splash was gone and the water subsided, it was just Izuku surrounded by a group of villains, with there being a group of 20 villains around him. And seeing this, the villains began to tell Izuku that he was doomed, and that he should give up now, and they may allow him to live. But while they were saying this, they swam closer and closer to Izuku. Then once they were less than a foot away from Izuku began to grin. because his plan has already been put into action, so he began to carefully let out his electricity, with him shocking every villain that was around him, which made it so they all got stopped in place and they began to get electrocuted. And because he both wanted to save electricity for later, in case he needed to, and because he didn't want to kill the villains via electrocution, Izuku was careful on how much electricity he let out. And after around 20 seconds, Izuku stopped with electricity, and when he did, the villains were passed out with them being fried but still alive. And seeing this, Izuku began to swim down, and after a few moments, Izuku was able to find Sue, and with their help, the two of them were able to get to the plaza. And when the two got to land, the two swam up, while trying not to get seen. And when they got close enough to the plaza, the two saw the bird monster standing over Aizawa with his face to the ground, and a couple feet away, the hand villain was watching. But before anything else could happen, the portal villain flew to the guy with the hand mask, and from what Izuku saw, he believes that something bad must have happened in the villain's plan, because the hand villain seemed to get seriously upset, and while he was having a temper tantrum, he turned his head, and when he did, he saw Sue. Then before Sue was able to react, the hand villain ran to her, and he tried to reach his hand to touch her head. But when the hand villain touched Sue's head, nothing happened. And seeing this, the hand villain turned his head, and when he did, he saw that Aizawa was barely lifting his head, and he was using his quirk on the hand villain, making it so his quirk was negated. And seeing this, Shigaraki snapped his fingers, and when he did, the Nomu smashed in Aizawa's head, making him create a crater. Then the hand villain went for another tap on Sue's head, but this time when he went in, Izuku was prepared, so he shouted the word fight, making his gloves turn into knuckles, and he was able to punch Shigaraki in the side with some electricity, burning him and making him get flung a couple feet. Then Shigaraki, pissed off at Izuku, told Nomu to attack Izuku, and hearing this, in the blink of an eye, the Nomu appeared in front of Izuku, and before Izuku was able to react, Nomu was able to punch Izuku in the gut, making him go flying until he landed back first into a tree, and when he made contact, Izuku blacked out. And seeing this, Shigaraki told Nomu to do the same thing to Sue, so she got hit as well, making her land a couple feet away from where Izuku landed. And seeing this, Shigaraki told Nomu to bring Izuku to him. So Nomu then walked over to Izuku and it grabbed Izuku by the head, and he began to walk over to Shigaraki. And while the Nomu was picking up Izuku slowly began to regain consciousness. So by the time he got to Shigaraki, he was able to tell what was going on. And when he got to Shigaraki began to laugh, saying that he's no more than a kid playing pretend hero, and that this will be the message to All Might, saying that he's too weak, and that he can't save everyone. Then once he said that, he put his hand to Izuku's elbow, making it deteriorate. And feeling this, Izuku began to scream from the pain, and he knew that he needed to get out of this as quick as he could, or he would die. So Izuku began to close his eyes, and he began to focus with all of his might, despite the pain. And he began to channel electricity, increasing the amount in the air. Then once Shigaraki got to Izuku's bone, he went to Izuku's other elbow. But before he was able to get to the bone again, Izuku began to feel an intense pain in his gut. Then when Izuku felt it, he shouted, "Now!" Then once Izuku said that, a powerful bolt of lightning that was worth 7 million volts hit the Nomu, and because of that, a shockwave exploded, blasting away Kurogiri, Shigaraki, and the Nomu away from Izuku. And there was a flash of light that filled the area, that made it so the two villains were blinded for a couple seconds. And when they were able to see again, they saw Izuku standing in a fighting stance, but he seemed to be in pain and very tired. And next to him, the Nomu was on the ground, burnt and smoking, and he was trying his best to move, with it having some trouble moving because of the severe nerve damage that has happened inside the Nomu. And because of that, the healing course that it has is doing a lot of work trying to fix the body and muscle tissues all over its body, so it'll take some time for it to get healed enough to get back into the fight. And seeing that, Shigaraki was pissed, so he began to charge at Izuku. But before he was able to get to Izuku seemed to have charged at Shigaraki, getting to him first. And when he made to Shigaraki, he made a quick punch to the gut with some electricity. But then he kept speeding past him, with him stopping a couple feet away. And seeing this, Shigaraki was confused on how Izuku was able to get to him so fast. And when he looked at Izuku, he saw that Izuku was equally confused, because Izuku didn't actually run at Shigaraki. The air pushed him towards him. And only because Izuku focused on getting close to Shigaraki, he was able to tap into another one of his powers. And because he was sort of paying attention, he kinda knows how he was able to move the air from the bottom of his feet. So basically, he doesn't know how to move the air besides from his feet. So Izuku then charged at Shigaraki again, using the same technique again, punching Shigaraki again. And because Izuku was focusing solely on the movement, Izuku isn't charging up his fists, and it kept going on for around 5 more times, with Izuku zigzagging around Shigaraki with him punching him in the gut whenever he was close. But when he went in for a 6th hit, the Nomu was finally able to recover, with him appearing right in front of Shigaraki, blocking Izuku's attack. And seeing this, Izuku backed away, using the air to launch him back to try not to get hit. But because Nomu was so much faster than him, it was able to keep up, so it punched Izuku in the gut, launching him again. But the second that Izuku landed on his back, the doors of the USJ burst open, and when the doors fell down, the people in the plaza turned their heads, and when they did, they saw All Might standing in the doorway. And before anyone could react, All Might ran all the way to the plaza, and he grabbed Aizawa, Izuku, and Sue, who was fighting the portal villain the whole time, and he put them in a nearby forest a couple feet away, and he told Izuku and Sue to get Aizawa and to get him to safety. Then right after he said that, he ran back to the plaza to begin fighting the League members, but after a couple minutes of the two carrying Aizawa, Izuku decided that he needed to help fight. So he dropped Aizawa's legs and he began to run back, leaving Sue to carry Aizawa. And when Izuku got to the plaza, All Might was slowly sinking into a portal while holding the Nomu in a suplex. And Bakugo and Kirishima were holding the portal villain down while Todoroki was freezing Nomu's right leg. And seeing all of this, Shigaraki shouted for Nomu to get up and to get the students. And hearing this, the Nomu broke free from the ice. And when it was freed, its legs were completely covered with frostbite, but it instantly healed itself. Then within the span of a couple seconds, the Nomu's leg was completely healed. And when it was healed, it ran at Bakugo trying to save Kurogiri. But before he was able to get to Bakugo, Bakugo seemed to have disappeared. And when Izuku looked next to him, he saw Bakugo standing right next to him. And when everyone saw this, they looked to see where Bakugo was originally standing. And when they did, they saw All Might instead. Then All Might and Nomu ran at each other, and when they met, they began to exchange blows. And after around 299 punches, Nomu starts to get launched into the air. And with one final punch with all of his energy, All Might launches the Nomu through the roof of the USJ. And after this, All Might tells Shigaraki that he's been defeated, and his Nomu is nowhere in sight. And because of that, they should give up now, or he's threatened that he'll take them down. But in actuality, All Might was weakened from fighting Nomu, and he was barely able to even keep up his muscle form. And Kurogiri, being able to see through All Might's lies, was able to tell that he was only putting up a brave face. So he told Shigaraki that now would be a good time to take out the symbol of peace. So hearing this, Shigaraki nodded and he began to run towards All Might. But before he was able to get to him, gunshots rang throughout the entire plaza, with Shigaraki getting shot multiple times in non-lethal areas. And when everyone in the plaza looked at the front doors, they see the teachers of UA. And seeing this, Shigaraki tells Kurogiri to get them out of there. So as quick as they could, they left via a portal. But right before they left, Shigaraki said that this wasn't the end of the league, and that they will come back to attack again. Then before he could say anything else, the portal closed. So now it's been hours since the attack, and everyone is back at the campus. And because All Might and Izuku were the only ones truly injured besides Aizawa, who was taken to the hospital, they were currently in Recovery Girl's office, with them being separated by a curtain. And because it's the start of the school year and Izuku has shown up to her twice in terrible conditions, Recovery Girl scolds Izuku for being too reckless. And after getting healed and resting for a couple hours, Izuku was let go. And while Izuku was walking home, Izuku was reflecting about what happened, and how he needs to be stronger. And with him now knowing about his air manipulation powers, Izuku knew that he needed to talk to Shyron about this. But while he was in that train of thought, Izuku eventually made it to the front gates of UA. And when he got to the front gate, he saw two people waiting for him, which were Ochako and Ida. And when he got to them, they began to walk home together. And that's really the What If. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time on Something Z.